Ever try picturing life without, well, everything? Like no grocery stores, no farms, no towns even,
It's a really good point, actually. Most people probably don't even consider that.
right? That's what we're getting into today, going way back to explore that very time. We're diving deep into the Neolithic Revolution using excerpts from Wikipedia's entry on it.
Yeah, it's a period that still has experts kind of baffled, archaeologists, anthropologists. They're all still trying to piece together why humans would abandon a lifestyle, hunting and gathering, that had worked for so long. I mean, we're talking millennia.
It does seem like a huge leap to go from that to, well, everything we know now.
Uh-huh.
So is that basically it? When we say Neolithic Revolution, we're talking about early humans going from hunting and gathering to farming.
It's more than just that, actually. It really is a revolution if you think about it. Think about it this way. It was a gradual transition that happened over thousands of years, not a sudden thing. And there were benefits, for sure, but also some downsides, things we're still dealing with today, in fact.
So no single aha moment. No one woke up and decided to plant a seed and boom, changed the world.
Not quite. For a long time, though, the main theory was the oasis theory, which is pretty much what it sounds like. The climate dried up, everyone had to gather around water, and that's how agriculture started.
Makes sense on the surface.
Yeah.
Necessity breeds invention and all that.
The problem is the climate data doesn't back it up at all. Turns out the Fertile Crescent, which is where we see the earliest signs of farming, it wasn't drying out, it was getting wetter.
Wow. So much for that theory. Okay, so if it wasn't about the environment pushing them to change, what are the leading theories now? Why the radical shift?
Well, one is the hilly flanks hypothesis, and it's actually pretty cool. It basically says that agriculture didn't come about out of some need, but because of abundance. So these hilly flanks of the Zagros and Taurus Mountains, this is in Southwest Asia, by the way. Anyway, these areas were super lush, tons of potential food just growing wild, animals that could be domesticated.
So they kind of had all the makings of an agricultural revolution just there for the taking.
Yeah, pretty much. But here's the kicker. We're now finding evidence that humans were interacting with those plants and animals way, way earlier than we thought, like 23,000 years ago at the Oheloth II site in Israel. They've found tools used to harvest grain there.
23,000 years ago. That's incredible. So not full-blown farmers yet, but
Exactly. Still hunter-gatherers at this point, but it really changes the timeline we had, makes the whole story much more complex.
it's really more of a slow transition than a revolution then. They were kind of dancing with these new ideas and practices over thousands of years.
That's a great way to put it. It really is more of an evolution than anything. But around 10,000 BCE, things start changing more quickly. The Fertile Crescent basically becomes this hub of domestication. Wheat, barley, lentils, you name it, they were trying to grow it. Sheep, goats, same deal. They were experimenting like crazy.
It really earns that name then, the Fertile Crescent. Sounds like the birthplace of agriculture as we know it. But it didn't stop there, obviously.
Not even close. The Fertile Crescent is key, but the important thing is that domestication wasn't a one-time thing. It happened all over the world at different times. People figured it out on their own, based on their environment and what was around them.
So many different journeys, all kind of ending at the same place. It's amazing to think about, honestly, and a heck of a puzzle to try to solve. So we've got all these different people in different parts of the world, all figuring out this whole farming thing. How did those ideas spread? Like, how did it go from these pockets of innovation to, changing the way everyone lived?
It's actually pretty amazing when you think about it. It was this mix of like migration, people moving around, trade, obviously, and then just cultural exchange, people learning from each other. Take Europe, for example. Around, let's see, about 6,500 BCE, they start farming in Europe. And guess what?
What's that?
They got it from Anatolia. The practices, the plants, the animals all came from there.
So those early European farmers, they were basically using a playbook from the Fertile Crescent thousands of miles away.
Pretty much, yeah. Although there is one interesting thing. It seems like almost all the animals they were domesticating in Europe, at least at first, they all came from Southwest Asia originally. Took them a while to start domesticating animals that were unique to Europe, like the aurochs,
Yeah.
what cows came from.
It's like they took the basics and then added their own twist to it. Instead of spices, they're experimenting with different animals.
Exactly. And get this, there were even places in Europe where the hunter-gatherers and the farmers, they lived like right next to each other for a long time. Imagine that. The things they must have shared, the things they must have learned from each other.
Talk about a culture clash, right? But it must have been an amazing time to be alive, too, to see that change happening. And not just in terms of, food, but their entire way of life was changing.
It's one of the most important things to remember about the Neolithic Revolution, actually. Yeah, it brought about all this innovation, but it also changed us how we live together, our health. It even had downsides.
Really, it wasn't all sunshine and bigger harvests.
Yeah.
What were some of the downsides?
Well, we can tell by looking at skeletons from that time that early farmers, they were actually shorter on average than hunter-gatherers, and they got sick more often too.
That's crazy. You'd think a steady food supply would mean being healthier.
Right. It's complicated, but diet probably had a lot to do with it. Hunter-gatherers, they ate a lot of different things, whatever they could find, really. But farmers, they focused on a few staple crops, and that probably led to them not getting all the nutrients they needed.
Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Or maybe don't stake your health on a single crop is a better way to put it.
Exactly. Plus, think about it, when you have more people living closer together, it's easier for diseases to spread. No social distancing back then. And being around domesticated animals meant more chances to get sick from them, too.
It's a good reminder that, yeah, progress has a cost, right? But, okay, so we've got bigger settlements now, more people. That changes how people relate to each other, too, doesn't it?
Hmm.
Like, did it change their social structure, how they organize themselves?
Absolutely. One of the biggest changes is that with agriculture, you have the possibility of surplus. Some people can produce more food than others. And what happens when that happens?
I'm guessing not everyone gets to share equally.
You got it. You start to see differences in wealth and social status emerge. And over time, those differences become more rigid, more entrenched. So you go from these small, relatively egalitarian hunter-gatherer groups to,
Societies with haves and have-nots. It's almost like social inequality was sown right alongside those first seeds.
that's a powerful image. And you're right, along with those inequalities came new power structures, new roles for people to fill. It wasn't just about who could gather the most food anymore, it was about who controlled the land, who controlled the surplus.
And that's a pretty far cry from those early days of everyone chipping in to survive, isn't it?
But this wasn't just about, social upheaval and everything. There's a ton of innovation happening too, right?
Yeah.
New tools, new ways of doing things. Absolutely. I mean, think about it. You've got all these crops now. You have to figure out how to plant them more efficiently, how to store the extra food, how to process it. It led to a surge in new technology, like better grinding stones to make flour from grain, granaries to store the extra grain, even new types of pottery for cooking and storage.
It's kind of amazing how adaptable humans are. Like, you give them the challenge, they'll figure out a way to make it work.
That's what's so fascinating about studying this period, but it goes beyond just tools and technology. The Neolithic Revolution, it completely changed how humans interacted with the natural world.
I mean, farming is about as natural as it gets, isn't it? What do you mean changed how they interacted with it?
Oh, it's definitely connected to nature, but it's also about control. Suddenly, humans aren't just living in nature, they're actively shaping it to get what they need. They're creating irrigation systems to water their crops, clearing forests to plant more fields.
Instead of being a part of nature, they're trying to control it.
Exactly. And that has big consequences, some good, some not so good.
I wonder what they would have thought, those early farmers, if they could see us now. Do you think they had any idea of the long-term impact it would have, all this change?
Who knows? But that reminds me of another concept that's really interesting. The secondary products revolution.
Okay, now I'm curious. Secondary products revolution, what's that all about?
Well, think about why people first started domesticating animals. What do you think it was for, mainly?
Food, right? Meat. Pretty basic stuff.
Yep. But then an archaeologist, Andrew Sherratt, he's the one who came up with this idea, by the way. But he says that humans eventually realized that, hey, these animals, they're good for a lot more than just a burger. And that's where the secondary products come in.
Okay, so what else did they use them for? Besides the obvious.
Here's where it gets really interesting. They start using the hides for clothing, for shelter, wool for weaving, even manure. They figured out they could use that to fertilize their fields.
Talk about making the most of things. Like unlocking a secret menu of uses for their animals or something.
Exactly. But we can't forget probably the most revolutionary secondary product of all,
What's that?
animal traction.
Oh, right. Using animals to pull plows and carts. No more breaking your back trying to do it yourself.
It totally changed the game. Suddenly, you could farm way more land, way more efficiently. It massively increased food production. Just realizing that, hey, these animals can do more than just provide meat, it changed everything.
It's amazing to think about how far we've come.
Hmm.
from wandering around looking for food to intentionally growing it, from small groups to these larger, more complex societies, new tools, new social structures, even a new way of thinking about nature itself.
And it all started with a few simple steps, right? But that's the thing to remember. The Neolithic Revolution, it wasn't just this one event, this one moment in time. It was a process, thousands of years in the making.
Mm.
And it happened in different ways all over the planet.
It really shows how one change, even if it seems small at the time, can ripple out and change everything. I mean, it still affects us today. We're still dealing with the consequences of choices made by those early farmers all those years ago. Pretty mind-blowing when you think about it. It really makes you think, doesn't it? Like, here we are thousands of years later, and those early days of farming still have such a huge impact on us.
It's a great example of how connected everything is, really. The decisions those early farmers made, the things they figured out, they didn't just disappear, they echoed through time, and now here we are.
It's like we can trace a line straight from those first farms, those first domesticated plants and animals to, well, everything. Our entire global food system.
And it's not just the food, right? I mean, think about it. The Neolithic Revolution, it's really the foundation for everything. Civilizations, societies, even how we see ourselves in the world, our place in nature.
It's easy to forget all that, I think.
Yeah.
We take it for granted that there was a time before agriculture, before cities, before any of this existed.
It's true. You open a textbook and it's like, bam, this event, the Neolithic Revolution happened, like a simple before and after picture. But it wasn't like that, was it? As we've been talking about, it was way more complicated than that.
Absolutely. A mix of, what, ingenuity, adaptation, maybe even some luck thrown in there. Who knows what would have happened if things had gone differently. It's wild to think about a handful of seeds planted thousands of years ago leading to all of this.
I know. It kind of makes you wonder what those early farmers would think if they could see us now, don't you think? Imagine showing them a city, a smartphone. Would they even recognize the world?
It's a good thought, actually. We're part of something so much bigger, this whole story of humanity. It goes back so much further than we realize. Humbling, really.
And we're all adding to that story, aren't we? Building on what came before us.
So as we're wrapping up our deep dive into the Neolithic Revolution, what's the one thing you hope people take away from this?
That it's about way more than just farming. It was a complete shift, not just in how humans lived, but in how we interacted with each other, with the planet. And that shift, it's still shaping us today.
It reminds us that history isn't just something in the past, right? It's alive.
Mhm.
All those innovations, all those challenges those early humans faced, they're a part of who we are.
And when we understand that story, where we came from, we understand ourselves better. Maybe we even get a glimpse of where we might be going.
And on that note, we'll leave you to think about that. The amazing journey of humanity, from those first tentative steps into agriculture to, well, everything that came after.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.